You're listening to the University of Sioux Falls Campus Ministries podcast.
Hi everyone, my name's Matt Stiles and I serve as the campus pastor at the University of Sioux Falls. On this podcast, we have conversations with USF staff, alumni, students, and experts in the community to help us better integrate the Christian faith into our particular field. Our focus this semester will be psychology and spiritual formation. Today on the podcast, we welcome Dr. Gretchen Hoffman. She obtained her PhD from the University of South Dakota in 2004, and she now serves as the area chair of social sciences and as professor of psychology here at the University of Sioux Falls. She was recently named as the Faculty of the Year in 2023 and 2024. Her areas of expertise include personality theory, intelligence and personality assessment, psychotherapy, abnormal psychology, social psychology, and forensic psychology. And so just by that list, I have a ton to learn and just excited to be sitting with you today. So thank you for being a part of this podcast.
Matt, thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here.
So this semester, we are going to be discussing the theme of psychology and spiritual formation and just sharing helpful insights about how to grow in both of those. One of the neat things about serving here at the University of Sioux Falls is that I'm just surrounded by so many brilliant people who are experts in their field, and I just have so much to learn. I think it was a few weeks into my starting here that I was a part of the convocation, and you were speaking at that. And as you were speaking, I remember thinking, this is so good, such a great integration of psychology and formation. And so I'm wondering, for those who didn't have the chance to hear it, could you share a little bit about what you talked about that day?
Absolutely. So as I spoke at convocation, I talked a little bit about how humans are made to be social beings, and I'll come back to that a little bit, but if you think about it, and sociologists will tell us that the most introverted person among us will, over the course of their lifetime, impact something like 10,000 people. If you think about that, if each one of us impacts 10,000 people, and those 10,000 impact 10,000 others, that's 100 million people. And if each of those touches 10,000 others, you've touched the world many times over. So we're made to be social beings, and we have more influence than we can possibly know. If we bring it down from our social selves to just the self, there's more to us than we know as well. And so if we think about the self, just for a matter of definition, we can refer to it as the totality of the individual, our conscious and unconscious being, our mental and physical capacities. And so often when we think of ourselves, we think of our conscious selves, or in psychoanalytic terms, it would be like our ego, like what we want to do, what we want to accomplish, our New Year's resolutions, that sort of thing. But there's so much to ourselves that we don't think about. Like, you don't have to tell the cut on your finger to heal, or you don't have to send encouraging words to your heart to tell it to beat 80 times over the next minute.
Right.
There's just so much more capacity in the self than what we're aware of. And one of the coolest things, I think, is embedded in the self and its capacity is our capacity to grow and to adapt. And if you think about that, our ability and capacity to grow and adapt, what's so interesting there is that this capacity is unleashed when we confront new and novel things. In other words, when we face challenges that's when we grow and adapt. And if you think about it, the road to resilience and the road to self-actualization is paved by challenge, paved by our errors, paved by our mistakes. But it's through those experiences that we grow and change and adapt. If we didn't make mistakes and so forth, we would have no need to change, to become stronger, to self-actualize. So it's the errors and mistakes that actually grow and shape our brain. And the cool thing, too, is the more we want to change, which signals our value system, the faster that change occurs and the easier it is to accomplish. And then kind of bringing it back to, we talked about the social self and we talked about the self, but it doesn't end there. I would also like to mention we're human beings that have been touched by the divine and made in the image of God. And so the purpose for ourselves is higher than any particular class we take or assignment we complete or job that we have. But our purpose is bigger, and the power behind that purpose is even greater. As Deuteronomy 31:8 reminds us, it's the Lord who goes before you. He's the one who will be with you. He will not leave you or forsake you. Do not fear or be dismayed. So our lives, their purpose, our potential are more meaningful than we know.
That's all extremely good. Just thinking of the biblical witness of the call to community. Our formation is not just individuals isolated from one another, but also the understanding of the self. I think sometimes when people think of spiritual formation or maybe even spirituality in general, it's like, how do I just get this all right? And sometimes there's a paralyzing effect that can happen if I don't get it all right, I shouldn't even try,
Right.
versus being formed through some of those failures and experiencing that and recognizing that God is active even in the mess of our attempts is encouraging.
Exactly.
As we think about spiritual formation, some of the things that come up regularly are the power and influence of habits and these small actions to form us over time or even our own potential. How does psychology better help us understand both of those and how they work?
I would start by saying, and I'll kind of come back to that, but I want to share that there are two kind of general goals of psychotherapy, but I would say that they're kind of general goals that apply to all of us, whether we're, seeking help or not. And those general kind of life goals are resilience and self-actualization. And I would say in that order, in the sense that resilience is making us stronger, more capable, more competent. And actualization then is utilizing or unleashing that potential. So getting stronger and then actualizing that, carrying it out. And so if you think about the road to becoming stronger and to actualize, a lot of this has to do with what we do every day, the habits that we have, and trying to unleash that potential. And I would encourage just all of the listeners to be thinking about, like, what are the habits that you undertake every single day, and what are the habits that you want to have persist, and what are the habits that you want to have changed in order to unleash that potential. One of the things that has been quite informative in the literature is relative to habits. You're going to want to, say you want to adopt a new habit, you want to instantiate something that you can do that's achievable, that you don't set the goal so high that there's just no way that you're going to achieve it. But start a new habit that's doable and that one thing that helps is if you can combine things that you value. So here's an example. Maybe you want to get in shape, but you also want to grow closer to the Lord. So you could combine those activities into one session. So as an example, if you're on a treadmill and maybe your favorite prayer app or something like that is going. And so what you see there is a confluence of value. I cherish time with the Lord and I want to get fit. But if I don't get on the treadmill, I've just lost two things that I really value. Yeah. And so if I do both, it's quite a productive session. And I'm not suggesting that your prayer time is limited to time on the treadmill or anything like that. Right. But it's kind of a way of bundling these things that you value. So then if you don't do it, it's all the more disheartening because now you've not done two things instead of just being on the treadmill. So it's a way to allow yourself to start to adopt new habits that are especially meaningful. And do you care if I share an example from one of my classes about
that would be great.
Habit formation? So in my counseling class, we talk about atomic habits, and many of you have probably read James Clear's book by that name. And it's starting just small habits every day and then building those small habits. And so I have my students in my counseling class adopt an atomic habit, just as a way for them to understand we expect our clients to change. Look at how difficult it is for us to change. We expect clients to change. We better see what it's like. And so in my counseling class, students do this, and then they report kind of what their habit is and also how it's going. And I'd like to just share, I'll just read part of the response that a student gave me relative to the atomic habit that she adopted. This young woman wrote, "The atomic habit that I have adopted is a small change, and it's a change to my morning routine. I used to wake up, I used to go on my phone, do my skincare, get dressed, and make my bed. But lately I noticed something, that I would spend time on my phone scrolling through other people's lives before I ever even thought about the day and to start living my own. It was a difficult habit to break the first week or so, but now it's easy. I love the thought of having time to myself as I start a new day, and rather than clogging my mind with the lives of other people, I'm in a better mental state now. Everything is clearer to me. I'm excited to continue and see where this new habit takes me." Wow. And I want to share something too. On some level, the habits that we have are an expression of what we value. But what you see here is she was able to find something that she valued more. And so I think for habit formation to take hold, probably with greater strength, is finding that which you value the most, and where you can to do that coupling that I had talked about before.
That's really helpful as we approach formation, because sometimes it'll just be, if we're looking to cut out a habit that we've noticed is taking up time or forming us in a way that we hadn't hoped, and we're just like, I just want to stop. But being able to find other desires that will help us and pairing those together gives us a way to move towards those.
One of the things I would add with habit formation, if you were seeing a therapist about, stopping a particular habit or starting another one, one of the first things a therapist would tell you is, if you stop the habit, what will you do in its place? And it's always good to be thinking about that. If I don't do this, have a plan for what you're going to fill that void with. If you're not going to play video games, what are you going to do instead? If you're not going to be scrolling on social media, how is that time going to be spent? So to be having ready at hand something that you're going to do in its place is so much more helpful as opposed to just having that void where the same triggers that you had before that triggered you to scroll social media, they haven't been abated at all. And now the temptation to go back to social media is just ready and raring to go.
Yeah, that's so helpful. It was really neat to hear from students in your classroom too, and their experience of how they're processing it and putting it together for their own formation. I've been able to visit with various students from your classes, and they just mentioned how much they enjoy them and different things that they've taken from them. And one of the things that really stood out to them and impacted them is your sharing about Viktor Frankl's work, A Man's Search for Meaning. And just wondering if you could share some insights from that book and how they might impact our understanding of formation.
Yeah, well, in my psychology of personality class, I have everyone read Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. And it's about his experience as a prisoner in the Nazi concentration camps. And Frankl was a psychiatrist, and he had a manuscript for his book tucked under his coat as he goes into the prison camps. And of course, that was ripped away from him and stolen from him. And he's in the concentration camp, and he talks a lot about, in some ways, his experience there was literally a matter of luck. You know, the guards would point to a particular person to go right or left, and if they went one direction, they were sent to the gas chambers. If they went to another direction, they weren't. And so certainly some of his experiences were out of his control. But it's interesting in this book where you think, how could you have less control than being a prisoner in a concentration camp? I mean, it's hard to fathom any situation where you would feel less in control of your life. And it's in that state where on many levels he finds freedom. And it's the freedom to make meaning of the moment. And so the text teaches us, Frankl writes, that everything can be taken from a man but one thing, and that is the freedom to choose one's attitude in any given situation, the freedom to choose one's own way. And so it's so ironic that in a concentration camp, he talks about freedom. In class, we talk about the difference between happiness and meaning. And when you think about happiness, happiness is an emotion and it's fleeting. You know, students graduate from college and they're happy and they're at the commencement ceremony and they're, you know, glowing and it's so wonderful. But the happiness is fleeting. 2 weeks later, they're on to doing other things as they should be. But where happiness is fleeting, meaning is sustaining. And so, you know, you think about the good times and the bad times in your life where you felt that you had a purpose or that you made a difference or that you did something meaningful. Those are the sustaining moments as opposed to just happiness. There's been a line of research that's been looking at like happiness as opposed to meaning and life satisfaction. And what they find is that oftentimes people with what we would kind of say the most struggles in life end up reporting being most satisfied with life because of how they worked through and how they became stronger and more resilient and more actualized through the trials of life as opposed to the wins or the celebratory times. It's not that we should minimize the good times. I'm not saying that. When they come, that's fantastic. But it's more sustaining, I think, to find that purpose or that meaning in life. And I would add one thing, too. We live, I think, in a culture where there's almost a toxic positivity, where we are almost morally mandated to adopt, a positive outlook. And what that seems to be doing is suppressing or even repressing authentic feelings. There are difficult situations in life, and I'm sure the listeners can identify with difficult situations or their loved ones or whatever. And it's okay to feel what you're feeling. The Lord gave you emotions not to be suppressed and repressed, but gave you emotions so that you can feel, but not that we just act on them and are not regulated, but to use them more as data points. What are these feelings telling me? What meaning can I find in this loss and in this suffering and in this time, good or bad? So I think one of the things that Frankl's book really drives home is the idea of meaning, which in many ways is almost synonymous with the idea of value. Find in this moment, what are you learning? How are you easing the suffering for someone else? How are you making this moment purposeful? And again, remember, you're never alone. There's a higher power, a higher purpose, and a higher calling.
That is so rich with insight. Just seeing different people that I've been able to walk alongside as a pastor. And I think of one person in particular. Her story, she had found a growth in her esophagus, so she wasn't able to swallow much, and the care that was needed had extended beyond what they could give at her home facility. So where she went, she had this pain from swallowing. She had had a procedure, and I would always go and visit her, and I think the stories that she was telling herself and even her outlook was a different way of putting the pieces together. And one time we were walking out of the facility, and she would always walk me to the door, and her room was the farthest away from the door, but she would walk me all the way out, and we were passing by one lady who seemed to be having a hard time, and a staff member was talking with her, and she had just greeted her as we walked, and she said, one of the ways that I find that I can serve here is when people are going through a hard time, I can listen and I can give a word of cheer, which wasn't like a cheap kind of cheer thing, but just this ability to be present in other people's suffering, which she herself was suffering. Just showing that freedom in constraint is powerful.
Right, exactly.
One thing we had talked about even before we started recording is people's ability to listen. And hopefully on a future recording, we could cover more of this, because there's so much to look at. But in our culture, and one of the ways it shapes us too, is not only toxic positivity, but also this inability to really be present and to be able to listen to one another. And we think of the James passage of being slow to speak and quick to listen and slow to become angry. And it seems like so often we are being shaped in such a way where we're the opposite of that. Are there insights that you could give that would maybe help us be formed to be better listeners?
I would say one of the things to think about is when you ask students, are you a good listener? They pretty much all of them say, oh, I'm really a good listener. And if you ask them, are you a good driver? They say, oh, I'm really an excellent driver. If you ask them, are you a good friend? They say, I'm a really great friend. If you ask them, are you kind? And they'll say, boy, I'm really kind. And so you always kind of want to be careful on these subjective types of measures, because people have a tendency, it's called a self-serving bias, and that is, we have a tendency to kind of see ourselves in a pretty good light, that I'm a pretty good driver, I'm kind of a kind person, and I'm a good listener. So one of the things that I have students do in my counseling class is we kind of check in on our listening skills. And the assignment for the week is to think about a conversation, have a conversation with somebody, and it's particularly helpful if that conversation is about some topic that you disagree on. So students will report that they called home or something and they had a talk with their mom and they don't see eye to eye on how to spend money, or that maybe their mom is saying you're spending too much money and the student is saying, no, I'm not. And, they just don't agree on it. Mm-hmm. So the essence of the assignment is to listen, because you're in disagreement with somebody, to listen as carefully as you can, and then after that, and you cannot interrupt, you cannot, stop them. Wait till they're completely done, and there's even kind of that pause after they're done, so they're done. Mm-hmm. And then to paraphrase back as accurately as you can. Now, you're not parroting or mimicking what they said, but you're extracting the essence of what they said and trying to be as precise as you can with that paraphrase, but to express it and to deliver it in a way that is acceptable to them. So you're not, saying it begrudgingly. You're not adding your own negative emotional tone to it. You're not, minimizing it by the way you're speaking, but you're paraphrasing it back and you're saying it in a tone that's acceptable so that you get the affirmation, and you're going to be looking for this, that they're nodding or they say, yes, that's what I said. And it sounds incredibly easy, and in reality, it's pretty hard to do, because most of us, when we're listening to somebody, what we tend to do is be thinking about what we're going to say next. And especially if we're in conflict, we're thinking about what our rebuttal is going to be. And so to just be able to listen without pretense or without any agenda, but just listen, paraphrase back, accurate relative to content, and acceptable relative to emotional tone. Students a lot of times will say, it was tougher than I thought. And the other thing is, it sounds so artificial. But let me just say, they invariably will say that when they comment what their mom said or whatever, the mom said, yeah, that's exactly right, and then keeps going. So the point here is when we first hear it, we think, oh, that's artificial, but it doesn't seem to come across artificial actually in conversation, and it provides the avenue through which your mom can now explain even further, and you can keep, trying to understand her point of view. And so I'd say one of the ways that we can become better listeners is to just be thinking in the back of your mind, instead of your rebuttal, if you had to paraphrase back in content, in tone, what's acceptable to that person, you probably have been listening pretty well. And quite frankly, that's a counseling skill that your therapist uses a lot, to just try to get to understand. That's what empathy more or less is, to try to understand where you're coming from and the lens through which you're seeing a particular situation.
That is also good. Thank you so much for sharing your insight and wisdom, and I think we've all learned a lot. So thank you for being a part of the podcast.
Thanks, Matt.